Okay, so let's get started. So GDPR, with this GDPR regulation comes much fire and brimstone. If you don't know already, May 25th, 2018 is the big day that everyone is looming over. It's a date that is seared in the mind of everybody who's concerned about GDPR, all the stakeholders, all the businesses, as this is the date that businesses we know are required to be compliant with GDPR. And that's 336 days in case you were counting. So everyone knows about the regulations, the penalties, and the horror that is ensuing right now globally as businesses try to fight their way to really understand this turmoil about GDPR. And where there is turmoil, you will often find people, lots and lots of people who want to be helpful. There are consultants with solutions, with integrated GDPR solutions, and they all bring much knowledge to the table. They specialize in providing, the help, the support, the advice, and the guidance for businesses who need to navigate their way through this GDPR landscape. By helping you understand the regulations and how it applies to your business, by outlining and developing the framework and steps and businesses can take to become compliant, and recommendations for your business. But I will have you know right now that this is not that kind of webinar. I am already assuming that you know what you need to do and with the regulations that are coming into play. But the big question is, how do you do it? We're going to roll up our sleeves, get down into the File Facets tool. I'm going to tell you a little bit File Facets and how we help and how we can help with compliance regulations to actually action data for these requirements, and provide you with some tips and tricks and tools so that you can directly and practically help your business be compliant. So who is File Facets? Well, first, I would be remiss not to touch again on the company's Canadian heritage just for a minute. Canadians, we have contributed many great things to the world and not so great things. I'm looking at you, Justin Bieber. But File Facets is a Canadian company. We're headquartered in Ottawa, Canada's capital. It's often called Silicon Valley North, kind of a tribute to the Silicon Valley South in the US. And we have the greatest density of high-tech companies in Canada, actually. We've got 1,700 high-tech companies and employ about 70,000 employees across our city. And as a technology hub, Canada has been the great birthplace of many of technologies, invented the BlackBerry and kind of the evolution that we see in our smartphones now, and the evolution of self-driving cars and whatnot. But I digress. So what does a Canadian know about GDPR? The truth of the matter is that privacy is a global concern. Governments around the world have put policies in place to protect the information of its citizens, and businesses globally have a responsibility to consumers to protect the information that they keep. And we know that as our world as a whole becomes smaller, data privacy, it really has no borders. And this is probably one of the first regulations with GDPR that really affects businesses worldwide. It doesn't matter where that company is located. If it's a company that's possessing information of a European Union resident, it affects everyone. And I found this interesting heat map, actually. It's from DLA Piper about data protection laws of the world. And it shows regions in the world, again, in kind of this heat map format, where the importance of privacy regulation and enforcement are weighted throughout the world. And it's weighted by limited, moderate, robust, and heavy. And well, I think the study could have used a different term for the heavy. We kind of visually can see here that both countries view data protection and privacy with a similar importance and essentially weight behind it, in which the guidelines in which businesses conduct and protect personal data of its citizens. So a little bit about File Facets. So the company itself has been around for 16 years and really based itself in a services company with very deep data management expertise, data analysis, information governance services. We have moved hundreds of thousands of files in different industries, in different jurisdictions around the world. We have offices in 3 countries. We've got a distributor, reseller, and support network around the world. And we work with some of the leading regional and global industry leaders in legal, security, and ISVs as well. But the tool itself, it is an online platform. It's an all-in-one tool for privacy, compliance, and enterprise discovery. And it allows businesses to really take this data and the movement and the governance of data into their own hands. And we make it easy for businesses to find, to process, and to move unstructured content across the enterprise. And we kind of look at three things. We look at privacy compliance. So we find PII, personally identifiable information, to keep sensitive data secure. And we can locate those files across the enterprise because it's impossible to protect it if you don't know where it is and you don't know what it is. The second is data discovery. We can dive deep into repositories across the enterprise, discover, analyze, and action data from multiple sources, regardless of where it is. This really helps businesses to kind of, again, take back their own governance of their own data, reduce backup time and cost, reduce time and transfer time or migration time, and then we do secure data transfer. The tool allows us to do auto classification and machine learning, metadata attribution of files, and physically move unstructured data into repositories. So that's the kind of three things that that File Facets can help with. The online tool itself is lightweight. It's software as a service. There's no additional infrastructure a business would need. And it's a hybrid cloud solution, meaning there's a software agent that's installed on the client side through an enterprise firewall that allows access to the tool. But at all times, it's only the metadata that's sitting in the cloud. And this is really important for businesses, especially with GDPR, knowing exactly where that data is and where it's being stored. It's only the metadata that sits in the cloud in this environment. The files remain at all times in their source repository, and only until it's ready to be moved, if you are moving it within an organization from one, let's say one location to another, that's the only time it actually moves. So businesses can be sure that their content is safe and secure in the repositories that they're keeping them in. So File Facets, just one last plug about kind of our technology partners here. We consider ourselves technology agnostic. So we're kind of sitting in the middleman between all these different technologies and allowing businesses to kind of see and discover the content across these multiple repositories that they may have in their environments, in their work environments. So let's dive into GDPR and how we can help. So we know that there are some key changes to the policies that are coming, several significant changes that we need to be cognizant of. The first we know is penalties. We know it's a fine of up to 4% of revenue and 20 million euros. We know that another change to policy is consent. So consent must be easy to understand, and it must be as easy to take it away as it was for me to give it. And then the third is privacy by design. And you need to include data protection from the onset when planning out and designing your business processes. And these are all key changes to policy that most businesses need to wrap their heads around. But and again, lots of people out there that can help businesses do that. Now, what we focus on and what we solve for are the changes to policy that actually require action. There is a need and a requirement to physically do something or produce data that is an organization's possession. And so these include the right to access. Individuals must be able to get confirmation of what personal data is being processed by an organization, where it is, and why it's, or what purpose or where it's being stored. The data controller within an organization needs to be able to provide electronic copies of the data free of charge to someone who might be requesting it. The second requirement, or the action that requires the second action is the right to be forgotten. And this is the right for individuals. They are entitled to have their data either erased or ceased from further dissemination throughout the organization, and also withdrawing consent on data that's no longer relevant to the purpose that for which it was first given. And then the third is the right to data portability. So this allows individuals to obtain the information and reuse their personal data for their own purposes across different services and different businesses. And it allows and should allow an individual user to move, copy, or transfer between, again, either IT environments or online environments or businesses itself. So why is this such a challenge, and why is this really following up both process, procedures, and actions for businesses. And it's because as businesses, we house so much information across multiple sources. And this kind of idea of big data and enterprise really speaks to that. And as much as we, as businesses, we try to keep everything in one spot. We've got our systems of records and our repository of records. It doesn't often happen like that in the real world. We've got different file sharing environments that are both network-based and cloud-based. We have cloud-based and network-based sophisticated enterprise content management systems. And then we have repositories like email, where it's not really a shared drive or repository, but there's a lot of information that it's in there. And then at the desktop level as well. And the risk here is, as having disparate data across these multiple sources, it does come with risk from an information governance perspective, a regulatory compliance perspective, and sure as heck, a data protection and privacy perspective. Now, the challenge again is how are you able to protect it, to access, to process it, and to move it to be adherent to those guidelines if you don't know where it is and you don't know what it is. And if we think back to our three key regulations that require action, the right to access, the right to be forgotten, and the right to data portability, these are the huge challenges when it comes to corporate data, where it's sitting in those multiple sources. And this is where File Facets can help. It can peer into all these different repositories at the same time and find the data we're looking for, process the data we're looking for, and physically move the data if that is a requirement of the action to action this data. So why is this important? The tool itself is it's kind of an all-seeing, all-knowing tool. It's really interesting. I'm going to take you through it in a second. But it has a very dynamic functionality, and depending on what you need to do with that data, what you need to find, what you need to do with it, how you need to process it, how you need to tag it, is really up to the business processes of that organization. And we can cluster data, like kinds of data, so that it's going to machine learn these types of files and this type of content are these types of content, and I want to do this with it. We can extract and apply metadata to files. We can support quality control. We've got an audit capability within the tool itself, which allows us to, as businesses, understand who's accessed it, who has made those requests or those inquiries, what were the actions of those inquiries, and what actions or decisions were made and taken by what individual against the data. Within the tool itself, we also have a taxonomy builder, meaning that we can build out a target index or folder index or metadata index within the tool and then see everything as it's sitting in there, which is really exciting. So something that's a little unique too, again, I'm going to come back to this email thing, and treating email as intellectual property. It is very often in business overlooked as a content repository, but it contains very important information and really should be protected and understand what's in there as much as a file repository or any other ECM environment. Again, but how do you protect it when you don't know it's there? We have a scanning exchange server module that scans .eml files at the server level and searches and scans the message text and the attachments. And then we're able to action that as required. Do you want me to delete it? Do you want me to move it? Or do you want me to secure the PII that perhaps I found in someone's email? The attachments are represented in the format with the original extensions if you are moving it. So if you do need to migrate or you do need to export it at the request of someone, you're going to see the message text and you're going to see the message file, and that's going to stay, or the attachment file, it's going to stay together really to maintain the context of the message. If I say, hey Tony, check this file out, and I attach something that contains PII, it's going to keep those two together so I know. We also have something unique at the desktop level, and so this is desktop level PII searching. We can scan content at the again, the individual desktop level. Users have the ability to partition personal information from corporate information, and you're able to exclude personal information from future scans. And how and why we do this is, if I kind of take myself as an example, pretend I work at an insurance company, I have two forms that are on my desktop. They kind of look the same, and if I was scanning it, I would say that those two forms kind of are similar. The one on the left is a book order form for my son's school, but it contains my name and credit card details. The one on the right is a life insurance application for a client that I'm working on. It contains the person's name, their address, their social security number or national registration number, and other personal details about them. Now, as a user, I can go in and, as an employee of that insurance company, I can go in on my desktop instance of File Facets, and it's going to show me all the files that contain PII on my system. And I'm able to go through and identify which information on my desktop is okay to be excluded from future searches, like receipts from online purchases that may have address and credit card confirmations on it, and like the book order form in that last example. So we're going to go through now how we can use File Facets specifically for the GDPR compliance, and kind of in those 3 actions that we talked about before. It is not, you know, it is not an idea or a nice thing to have. It really is the actual physical tool that by the ways and the means that it's going to take to actually action this data across the enterprise to be compliant with these regulations. So first, we scan multiple sources. We can identify personally identifiable information and content on ingest, meaning that when a new file is created or a new file is uploaded to a repository, we can have regular scans that identify this file and say, this has PII. We can set rules in place that move that content to a controlled environment. Perhaps it's you know, a secure folder, a secure place within an organization's environment. And then we can identify and delete content, but with the right to be forgotten. We can have the right to data portability. And I think one of the most important regulations that I noticed anyway that may be overlooked is the requirement to provide the data protection officer with the actual tools to support and perform these actions. It's now not enough to say, oh, my consultancy is going to do it, or, you know, I've outsourced it. We need to provide, and businesses need to have those tools in place internally to be able to perform these actions, and that's where File Facets really shines. So I'm going to take you through a project, and so we can really see and understand how File Facets is going to help with these regulations. So the first is I kind of log in, and I've got different projects and options to kind of guide my way through. I'm able to scan multiple sources within my environment. So when I click and I add a source, it's going to ask me for that path, whether it's a shared drive or a network access to an ECM, or whether it's a shared Outlook Exchange server. I'm also able to schedule source scans. And what this allows me to do is after my initial scan, I can have scheduled scans, maybe it's daily, maybe it's weekly, maybe it's monthly, to do a delta scan of all new information that was created within that time period. So we're not actually, you know, scanning the entire network repository again. We're scanning the delta, and we can schedule what that looks like. Now, by pointing my software agent to all these multiple repositories, what it's going to give me, first of all, is a dashboard view of every piece of content across my enterprise. In this kind of quick screen cap here, it's showing me my capture stats, so it's showing me what systems I'm pulling information from. In this case, it's a shared file drive, a Laserfiche, and a NetDocuments repository. It's showing me how many files, the size of files I have, and where they're sitting. It's also going to show me at a glance any redundant, obsolete, and trivial data that I'm housing across those multiple repositories. So how many records of business value do I have? How many are obsolete or trivial, meaning maybe they're temp files or DLL files or all those files that Windows kind of hides in the background, and how many are redundant? How many are duplicates? What can we get rid of that we don't need in our system? And then it also shows us PII types. When I scroll over, I can see, how many of these are passports, how many of these contain driver's license informations, and not only how many files I have that contain PII, but what type of PII is it? Do I have one type of PII? Maybe it's an address, or do I have two types? Maybe it's an address and a passport number. And at a glance, this gives you that very 10,000-foot view into the entire content across the enterprise. And then we can go in and we can define the PII. So I can, so the system comes loaded with about 100 different kinds of PII from around the world, license plates, passports, addresses. In this example here, I'm looking at the different address formats in different parts of Europe. I can see address format in Austria, Belgium, Denmark, Finland, France, Germany, and so on. I can create a new regular expression, or I can upload a CSV list of regular expression search terms. As an example, if I have a number pattern for client reference numbers, or perhaps employee bank account numbers for my HR department. So it's not limited to what's canned in here. Each business can create their own and define their own personally identifiable information, because sometimes PII for a corporation obviously differs from business to business. If you've got HR files or employee data within those HR files, employee bank account numbers within those files, it may not be a kind of an out-of-the-box PII, I'll air quote PII, but it is something that's very important to a business and should be able to be searched and found. And it's here within the defining PII where my business, if I'm using FileFast, is now compliant with the right to access regulation. I can use, as an example, an exact match search for Jennifer Nelson, and search and produce all files across the entire organization that include files that contain my name, as an example. And then FileFast is going to cluster similar types of documents together based on the similarity of content, not the file name. So here I'm able to define my clusters and select which files I want to action. If I have read access to the files, I can right-click on them and I can view that file in its native format. And obviously, if I don't have read access to that file, it will tell me too bad. But it's here that I can physically move from that source repository to a target folder, or I can simply apply metadata to that file with this kind of same target metadata taxonomy. And it's going to help me identify what type of PII, in this example, it is. I'm dragging and dropping these files into a folder called Secure PII, or applying that metadata into that folder. I can also define rules on how I want specific types of files to be handled. In this example, I'm searching specifically for contracts. It is showing me what source repositories I'm searching, in this case, a C drive, a shared drive, and another shared Windows drive. And it's going to show me on the right-hand side, it's displaying the files from those multiple sources that it's searching from for those files that are identified as contracts. And now I can tell it what to do with it. I can select the files, either some of them or all of them, that I want this new rule that I'm kind of creating applied to. And it's here that FileFast allows organizations to be compliant with the right to be forgotten regulation. I can search for a specific regular expression, and I can choose to dispose of all those files pertaining to a certain individual directly from the source repository. And again, I've got all the audit tools that I can also prove to the regulatory bodies or to the individual that all those related files have been deleted from the source. So now I can action or move that content, all that content in those kind of various examples that I'd used in the previous screens. I can delete it, I can move it, or I can export it to a location within my environment. And it's this feature and function that allows my organization to be compliant with the right to be for the right to data portability regulation. I can find all the content I have about an individual. I can export it and I can present it in a way that's easy to understand for the individual who has requested that information. So I'm hoping that run through of file facets and the not only the interface but the actions that we can meet those regulations. Again, the GDPR that requires the action, not just the policy regulations, but that actually requires a business to be able to do those actions with the right to access, the right to be forgotten, and the right to data portability. And I'm hoping that we've covered that for you. So magically, we have gone from our very grim fire and brimstone to breathing easy, knowing that we've got that we're compliant on the GDPR side, not only with the policies that consultants and other businesses are helping me to create within my business, but also by the actual physical tools that are going to help me be able to be compliant and make those actions if requested by regulatory bodies or individuals that I may have data for.